Well, welcome again to Cambridge. The reason for my delight a couple of weeks ago when I came in here first thing in the morning was this orchid. This is Stanhopea martiana. It has an absolutely delightful, sweet scent. I have two Stanhopeas. Unfortunately, I haven't got room for more than that. But it's really worth having at least one Stanhopea if you've got the room, because the scent is really fantastic. Now, the disadvantage is that the flowers don't last very long. In this case, this species lasts maybe 3 days, so the delight is rather brief. But they do provide flowers in succession. And just under 2 weeks ago, this is the, well, now dead flower spike that came out. There's one here which came out several days ago and is just going over. And then these came out more recently, a couple of days ago. So when you have several flower spikes out all at once, they provide really quite a show. And the scent, believe me, as soon as you come in to the greenhouse, or in fact, when I put the kettle on to make a cup of tea first thing in the morning, I could even smell the scent in the kitchen that had sort of crept through the door. It is so powerful. The scent of different Stanhopeas does vary, and there's a huge range of different species and a lot of hybrids as well. The reason I have this one is that a number of years ago at a flower show, somebody was selling a whole range of Stanhopeas, and I went round, because luckily some of them were in flower, sniffing the different ones, and when I came to this one I said, right, that's the one I would like, please. So I was very lucky to be able to choose a Stanhopea in flower. The main drawback with Stanhopeas is that they are quite large. They grow quite quickly and form really quite a large clump, and they tend to grow out of the sides of the basket, which they need to be in because, unlike most orchids, they send the flower spikes downwards, so they have to be in a basket so that the developing flower spikes can come out of the side. This is, I'll just put this back for a moment. The other advantage is they do flower when they're quite small. This is I repotted that one last year, and this is a division of it, which is actually flowering, as you can see. Unusually, this one has, well, in fact, the flower spike, I think, got caught up on the rim of the pot, and it was just behind this wire, so I just very carefully teased it free so that it could grow upwards. But normally they would come out of the side. And this one, as you can see, isn't a big plant, but it's flowering. And by the end of this year, when it's grown, there's new growth coming here, it will have formed a much bigger clump. They flower better when they've been in the same basket for a number of years and formed quite a tight clump. But by the time it comes to dividing them, they're so sort of cramped that they're actually quite difficult to divide. And you almost inevitably end up having to cut away the basket, because otherwise you just can't get at the plant to divide it without destroying the plant in doing so. And I have my second Stanhopea is this one, which is, as you can see, hasn't been divided for much longer. This is Stanhopea genesiana, which has quite a different habit. This one has much longer flower spikes. And really, I would say the flowers are more elegant. In my opinion, it's not quite so delightfully scented. It's not such a sweet scent, it's more of an interesting scent, because there's quite a lot of variation between them. But as you can see, the leaves, at least the older leaves, are a little bit pale. Normally I hang them not high up, but sort of mid or sort of a bit lower down, where they don't get so much light, because what they like is plenty of water and a fair amount of fertilizing when they're in growth. And I grow them, as do a lot of people, in a mixture of sphagnum moss and perlite, which provides very moisture retentive compost. But I would say if I had more room, I would definitely have more Stanhopeas, because they are just wonderful. And although the brilliance sort of, you know, the brilliant beauty and the scent of them is rather fleeting, they really are worthwhile growing. Now, whilst I've got the camera out, I must show you this one, which has been in the background for the last few minutes whilst I've been filming. This is Dendrobium aphyllum. I bought it a long time ago as a tiny little seedling that came in a sort of small plastic lunchbox from the Far East, labelled as a soft toy to get it through customs. Anyway, it took a long time to get it going because it was very small and it had a long and difficult journey over here. But eventually it began to grow really well. And quite a few years ago it started flowering for the first time, which was a delight. And the thing that I was a bit concerned about was it's supposed to be deciduous, so it's supposed to lose its leaves in the winter, but mine didn't do that. The new canes carried on growing into the autumn and through the winter, and then only started losing their leaves just when the flower buds started to appear, which is different to the way that you would expect it to behave. But I asked somebody at one of our orchid shows, and they said, oh yes, that's quite all right, you know, don't worry about that, ours does that as well. So I accepted that, and if that's what it wants to do, that's fine. The interesting thing about this Dendrobium, unlike many, is that the canes only flower once. So this cane is probably one that flowered last year, and it won't flower again. But what they do, if you're lucky after a while, is produce a kiki, and this is the first baby little plant that mine has produced. So this will be a nice way to give it to somebody. When the new growth starts to develop, as you can see, they begin to go upright, and then with their own weight as the season progresses, they gradually sort of fold down and become pendant. So when the plant has been growing for a few years, you end up with quite a sort of cascade. But I do find that I have to be careful to change its orientation every year or so in order to try to get the canes all growing evenly around the basket, which is reasonably okay at the moment, but it could be better. It is supposed to be scented, and it does have a very faint scent on a warm day sometimes, but I wouldn't say in this case that I grow it for its scent. Other examples of it, maybe in other conditions, maybe it is much more highly scented, but for me, unfortunately, that's not really such a feature, but it is such a beautiful and floriferous species, it's really worth growing, so I'm really pleased with it. Now, whilst I've got the camera out, I must show you this Phalaenopsis species. This is Phalaenopsis mariae. As you can see, I've got it growing on a cork cylinder, the sort that you quite often get in pet shops where people sell them to keep reptiles happy. And I found that this is quite a good way that I can grow several Phalaenopsis all together. This one has got 4 different species and varieties on it. Unfortunately, this one on the top, which I planted to start with, has grown rather large compared to the others and is now sort of shading it, but they don't seem to mind. And just around here, this is Phalaenopsis bellina, one of the beautifully scented Phalaenopsis, which I put on last year. It's got some rather messy leaves, which it's now beginning to grow out of. That was due to a nursery in one of the European countries who inexplicably sent plants out that were far too moist, so that on the way here they deteriorated, which was a great shame. Anyway, it's growing out of it now, and the scent of Phalaenopsis mariae is very much of lemon or citrus peel. It's not very apparent at the moment because it's quite a dull, not particularly warm day. But now that the flower spikes that have developed over the last few years and reflower every year, now it produces more and more flower. So now it's got such an abundance. On a good day during the daytime, it can smell really, really interesting. Anyway, I thought I'd show you that one. One thing before I go, I dipped this in a bath of rainwater, completely dip it with rainwater and fertiliser once a week, and then it gets sprayed once every day with rainwater. And originally I had trouble growing Phalaenopsis because this is intermediate in here, so in the winter it goes down to maybe 13, 14 centigrade, which isn't enough for most Phalaenopsis. They don't like that. And I almost gave up trying to grow Phalaenopsis, which was a great shame because I'm very interested in the Phalaenopsis species. But going back to shops that sell equipment to keep reptiles happy, I bought a heated mat, the sort that you buy to put under reptile, whatever you call it, aquarium or cage, and placed that underneath the shelf over nearest the heating, so that's the warmest place of the greenhouse, and the heated mats in the winter just keep the temperature maybe 2 or 2.5 degrees centigrade warmer than the rest of the greenhouse, and that has been enough over the last few years to keep my species Phalaenopsis happy through the winter. So now I'm collecting quite a few because they're really wonderful, and of course the flowers last a long time. In the case of mariae, not as long as some, but this will be looking really good for about a month. So it's a fantastic orchid to have now. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one.